"You're in violation of Ravenshade Code 321, Clarissa Morell said, tapping her clipboard like she was writing a parking ticket. Unregistered minors in the NICU past day 3 without community discharge paperwork can trigger an intervention. She was wearing hospital scrubs, not HOA board attire, not casual yoga wear, scrubs. With a fake badge that had the hospital logo printed wrong, the font just slightly off, and her photo peeled from an old ID. Clarissa Morell, president of our HOA, was standing in front of the neonatal security gate dressed like staff, and she thought I wouldn't notice. "The only reason that door didn't lock behind you," I told her, "is because I wrote the badge override that's still wired into this floor." Her smile froze. "Subscribe now if you're a parent or if someone you love ever spent 1 second in a hospital. Because this woman just impersonated a NICU nurse to enforce HOA policy. On my newborn daughter. My name's Ivar Kellum. I run cybersecurity for St. Reese Memorial Hospital. My wife died giving birth 3 days ago. And now the woman running my neighborhood, Clarissa Morell, the same woman who fined me for flying a grief banner on our balcony, just tried to remove my baby from neonatal care with a clipboard and a forged badge. The only reason I was watching the security logs in real time is because Nora's beanie pinged the emergency RFID system 5 seconds after Clarissa touched her. That beanie was lined with conductive thread. Nora made it herself, hand-knitting it between chemo sessions when we still thought she'd make it to labor. That beanie is the last thing my wife ever made. And Clarissa tried to walk out of the NICU with it tucked under her sleeve. She called it intervention. She called it code compliance. She called my baby a risk vector. What she didn't know was that Selene's bracelet still pinged back to my server. Because I don't just run security here. I designed the first iteration of Ravenshade's biometric perimeter before they turned it into a HOA-run surveillance grid. Before Clarissa took control of everything, including the access logs, and weaponized a wellness clause to target people like me. Widowers, outsiders, people who hold trauma energy in shared spaces, as she put it in her letter 2 days after Nora's death. She'd already fined me for letting Selene cry past curfew, already warned me for letting a non-resident caretaker through the smart gate, my mother. But this wasn't a warning, this was a breach, a violation. When I paused the security feed frame and saw the green wool tucked into her arm, Nora's wool, I stopped breathing. It wasn't about the fine. It wasn't even about the HOA's obsession with legacy purity and neurofeedback scores for optimal child environments. This was about control, about Clarissa needing to rewrite grief into non-compliance, about rewriting Nora out of the story. Altogether, that's why she wore scrubs. Not to fool the staff, to erase me. And that's when I knew I'd need more than policy appeals and polite letters to the board. I'd need to burn every trace of her access from the system. I'd need to trace the breach, prove the impersonation, and turn her own digital signature against her. And I could do it, because I built the logs she forgot to scrub. Clarissa didn't even bother to leave the building right away. After security escorted her out of the NICU wing, she stood by the second-floor vending machines like she had a right to be there, clipboard still in hand, her scrubs unwrinkled, spotless. She watched me walk down the hall toward her like this was a performance, not a felony. She tilted her head as I approached, like we were back at Ravenshade Glen's monthly compliance check-ins. "You should have declared the child within 72 hours, she said. Solene's lack of enrollment compromises the Developmental Overlay Index, our bylaws." "I'm not interested in bylaws," I said. "I'm interested in which HOA clause gives you jurisdiction inside a Level 3 medical facility." Clarissa didn't flinch. Ravenshade's extended jurisdiction policy was ratified in 2021 during the Smart Family Wellness Integration pilot. You would have known that if you hadn't opted out of community engagements after your wife's... Finish that sentence. She didn't. I walked past her, through the stairwell door, and let the thud of it closing speak for me, but something clawed at the back of my neck the whole way down. She was still smiling. Not in triumph, smiling like someone who'd already placed the next piece on the board. Back at my console in the monitoring suite, I rerouted Selene's bracelet data through an isolated channel. I wasn't taking chances. Whatever system Clarissa used to revive her old badge, whether it was through a shared database loophole or a bypassed contractor access key, She'd gotten closer than anyone should have. The logs didn't lie. Her ID was reactivated through a deprecated permissions list tied to the Family Systems Integration Pilot, FSIP, one of the half-baked public-private partnerships that got quietly shelved when Ravenshade Glen became its own gated experiment. I remembered the acronym from my years working defense contracts before I took this hospital position. I remembered the bureaucratic optimism, the dream of seamless parent-child infrastructure from home to hospital. I also remembered how it failed. No clear oversight, no ethical framework. They let HOAs plug into school and medical databases like they were social platforms. Most of those systems were supposed to be scrubbed and disconnected years ago. Most were. But Clarissa had found a back door. I pulled the archived contractor list from FSIP's final year. 32 names, half expired. Only one had logged badge activity in the last 90 days. Clarissa Morell. The access time matched the exact moment she entered NICU Wing B. No accompanying staff approval. No cleared entry from the nurse's log. Just a silent unlock on a badge that shouldn't have worked. And then it got worse. I traced the override command used to bypass the biometric confirmation. It was injected from a remote terminal at the Ravenshade HOA admin office. The system signature was buried under generic command lines, but I wrote that firmware. I knew where to look. The micro delay in packet delivery between line 12 and 13 was unique to an older tablet issued to HOA officers during the FSIP rollout. Clarissa had used her HOA tablet to breach hospital security. She hadn't just walked through the door. She reached across networks, across institutions, across every legal boundary that should have stopped her. And she did it while citing bylaws about neurodevelopmental overlay thresholds. I stared at the screen. My reflection stared back in the dark bezel. I looked like I hadn't slept in days. I hadn't. Selene was still asleep in the warming crib across the hall. My mother sat beside her, humming something wordless, something old. I could see her through the small observation window, head bowed, hand on Solene's blankets like she was afraid to let go. I remembered what Nora used to say when the nausea hit between chemo treatments. If she comes out crying, that's the music I'll live on. She had come out crying. Clarissa tried to silence it. The problem wasn't just the breach. It was that Clarissa believed she was right. She believed HOA authority should override grief. That a widow holding a baby in a quiet house, it was a threat to community equilibrium. I closed the terminal, copied every line of access log data to a cold drive. And I knew this wasn't going to end with letters or warnings. This was the first move in a digital war she didn't know she'd started. Malric Venn didn't look at me when I entered the community hearing room. He was standing behind the refreshment table, pretending to restock napkins, but his hands weren't moving, just clenched around the edge of the plastic tray, knuckles pale. Clarissa, on the other hand, stood front and center at the head of the room like it was her courtroom. The Wellness Mandate Amendment 2B grants the board authority to act on early neurohazard indicators, she declared. This includes developmental threats caused by unresolved trauma patterns, electromagnetic pollution, and destabilized caretaking environments. The words echoed through the glossy paneled room. LED downlights glared off her printed slides, each one listing phrases like infant sensory disruption, post-traumatic parent syndrome, and unmonitored grief exposure. I was seated in the back row, holding Solene's beanie in my palm. Clarissa wore white again, not scrubs this time, something closer to ceremonial, like a sanitized sermon about moral hygiene. She pointed to a chart on the screen that showed a spiraling graphic labeled Legacy Purity Risk Map. Our address was highlighted in amber. "She's calling my daughter a contaminant," I muttered. The woman beside me, a neighbor I barely knew, shifted in her seat. She didn't say anything. I scanned the room. A few board members nodded without really listening. 2 residents yawned. The rest stared ahead like every word was routine. Like HOA policy had always extended into your family's inner life. But Malric, he wasn't pretending well. He was HOA secretary, in charge of digital records and access audit compliance. He had once helped design Ravenshade's smart perimeter when the community was still in testing phase. Now, he couldn't meet my eyes. He was standing just a few feet from Clarissa's display, where she listed my alleged infractions. Unauthorized grief display, Nora's framed photo on our porch. Auditory violation, Solenni's cries at 2:14 a.m. Unregistered third-party caregiver, my mother. Delayed neonatal community compliance, no HOA form signed within 72 hours of birth. I could feel the tension in my chest like wire, but I didn't speak. Not yet. Clarissa closed her presentation with one final claim. Should these violations continue, the board reserves the right to recommend transitional care for Solène through our family support subcommittee. That was the moment the last thread snapped. I stood up. Transitional care, I said. You mean taking her? Clarissa blinked. This is not a seizure of custody. Really? I held up the beanie. Then what do you call walking into a NICU dressed like hospital staff with a forged badge? What do you call removing an RFID-tagged infant from a restricted wing using a badge that traces back to a deprecated HOA tablet? The room froze. Several heads turned. Even the yawners woke up. Clarissa tilted her chin. That's a very serious accusation. I've got the badge log, I said. I've got the command string and the system signature, and I've got one more thing you didn't think to scrub. I didn't look at Malric when I said it, but his posture shifted, just slightly. He dropped the tray. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the silence. Clarissa spoke again, smoother now. The HOA is not responsible for technical vulnerabilities in third-party medical systems. I stepped forward. And you're not entitled to harvest access from abandoned federal pilot programs either. FSIP was terminated 4 years ago. Your badge shouldn't exist. Her expression faltered, just for a second. But I saw it. That's when Malric bent down, slowly picking up napkins he didn't drop. When he stood, he looked at me. Just once. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't support. It was fear. Because he knew. He'd seen the logs, or helped issue the credentials, maybe both, and now he was watching the room turn, just slightly, away from Clarissa's. Control. The board chair shifted in his seat. One of the residents raised a hand, asking if medical impersonation was a listed clause violation. Clarissa answered with something legalistic and vague, but it didn't land the same. The silence after her words stretched too long. I left before the meeting ended. Solène was waiting, and I'd already said what I needed to. But before I walked out, I glanced at Malric one more time. He wasn't pretending to fix the tray anymore. He was staring at Clarissa like he'd finally realized something terrifying. That this wasn't policy anymore. It was crime. The call came in just after midnight. Not a real emergency, just another automated alert from the smart gate at the Ravenshade perimeter. Entry denied, unauthorized tag. I checked the feed. My mother's sedan was stopped at the entrance again, brake lights glowing, her face barely visible in the rearview mirror as she leaned toward the intercom. Clarissa had flagged her, again. I was already half-dressed, pulling on a hoodie when the second alert came, this one labeled Policy 4.6.2, Violation, Legacy Trauma, Hold. I froze. That code wasn't just rare. It was one of the leftover clause shells from the HOA's early AI trial phase. Legacy trauma had been a placeholder tag for deaths on community grounds. Except, Nora didn't die here. She died in the hospital. I scrolled down to the violation report. The system had flagged my residence as a neural destabilization zone. It used language I hadn't seen in years. Environmental risk vector due to unresolved grief cycles. And the access revocation for my mother, tied to Clause A17. Ineligible caretaker presence without community resolution protocol. I could feel it happening. Clarissa wasn't just creating false violations anymore. She was weaponizing the leftover infrastructure from the HOA's experimental AI phase. The system had been shut down 2 years ago, after a privacy complaint led to a class action suit, but parts of it remained embedded in old routines. Clarissa knew that, and she knew how to trigger them. I remote logged into the gate console and manually overrode the lock. The gate opened a second later, and my mother pulled through. I called her immediately. Don't say anything to anyone. Just come straight in and park inside the garage. Don't get out. She didn't argue. The next morning, the violation notice was taped to my door in red ink. Clarissa had gone analog. The form cited continued disregard for Phase 3 developmental compliance. and warned that a third infraction could lead to a temporary reassignment of neonatal support. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. She was openly threatening to take Selene under the HOA's Family Support Subcommittee guidelines. I took a photo of the notice. Then I drove to the gatehouse. The place was empty as usual. No one ever staffed it full time anymore. Just a shell structure with cameras, backup batteries, and a master key terminal that hadn't been touched in months. I keyed in my admin override from the FCP days. It still worked. Inside the console, I opened the caretaker tag registry. My mother's name had been flagged as denied access, emotional instability risk. No justification, no vote, just a single authorization signature, Clarissa Morell. She had used her board president clearance to lock out my family while creating an artificial risk trail behind my address. And she wasn't alone. I scanned the metadata on the entry. The command string included a version tag, CPT flag BAU v1.2 FSEP. That meant it hadn't been done through the current HOA system. It had been issued through an archived module, which meant Clarissa had gone into the deprecated infrastructure manually. That wasn't oversight. That was premeditated exploitation of legacy tech to create a paper trail for intervention. I downloaded the access log. Then I made a copy. The system was old, unpatched, but still tied to federal housing protocols. That meant tampering with it and falsifying entries wasn't just unethical. It was a federal violation under Title 18, Section 1030, fraud and related activity in connection with computers. Clarissa had finally stepped into my world. When I stepped out of the gatehouse, the sun had just started to rise. Selene's beanie was in my pocket, warm from my hand. I reached for my phone and pulled up the OCR submission page. I didn't hit send yet. I wasn't done collecting. But I was getting close. The badge shouldn't have worked, not after all these years. Not after the pilot program was buried and stripped from hospital systems. I sat at my workstation staring at the raw access log, watching the confirmation code blink like a quiet admission of failure. Clarissa's ID hadn't just opened the NICU exit. It had registered as valid. I magnified the log entry and traced it upstream, following the chain of protocols back to the root. There it was. FSIP authentication token, subpath, active legacy, contractor, override. The system still recognized her as a valid contractor through an archived override built for doula emergency protocols. I had flagged this exact vulnerability when I took over cybersecurity at St. Reese. It was buried in a dormant database branch, supposedly decommissioned after the family systems integration pilot was shuttered due to ethics violations and cross-institutional overreach. The same pilot that once connected HOAs to hospital nursery data, education placement logs, and infant development metrics under the banner of smart care continuity. Someone had reactivated it, not externally, but from within the hospital's internal network. That someone was me. Not directly, but when Nora was admitted for labor, I'd manually routed her maternal health profile into a protected layer so her private data wouldn't be absorbed by the hospital's predictive wellness algorithm. It was a personal workaround, the kind I used for sensitive cases, but in doing so, I'd unknowingly reawakened the FSIP routing protocol on that profile, and by extension, reopened access to any legacy contractor tokens still flagged as active. Clarissa's badge was one of them. I cursed under my breath. This wasn't just her manipulation, it was my oversight. My daughter's vulnerability was tied to my attempt to protect her mother. I rechecked the access node where Clarissa's badge had pinged from. A successful handshake from a level 2 entry point, staff elevator, not public hallway. That route required dual-level clearance. The second layer was biometric. There were only 2 options. Someone on the hospital staff had escorted her, or she'd bypassed the biometric scan altogether. I ran a subquery. Sure enough, the biometric entry was spoofed. A known loopback signature using a hardware exploit, something that could be done with a duplicated thumbprint pad or a thermal hand mimic, both of which had been documented in the original FSIP contractor rollout. She hadn't even needed help. She just used what the system hadn't been smart enough to forget. That's when I noticed the logging anomaly, milliseconds of delay between line 73 and 74. That wasn't normal lag. That delay was unique to one device. I'd seen it before. The original HOA-issued tablets, the ones given to FSIP participants to log community entries, wellness notes, and behavior patterns. I knew that delay. I'd written a diagnostic script for those models years ago when I worked in smart grid firmware. It was like seeing your own fingerprint on a broken lock. Clarissa had used an original FSIP tablet. That specific device delay was tied to only a handful of issued units, board members during Phase 2 of the Ravenshade pilot. Malric had one of those, and Clarissa had access to his credentials as secretary. My stomach sank. She hadn't just used a ghost badge. She'd rerouted her access through Malric's old credential string, possibly without his knowledge. The device ID was scrubbed, but the latency exposed her. If OCR or the Cybercrimes Division reviewed this data, they'd see what I saw: intentional system exploitation. And if Malric had no idea she was using his ID, he was on the edge of being framed for federal-level intrusion. I saved the terminal output to my cold drive, tagged it Clear Trace Proof 01, and encrypted it. Then I looked at the time. 1:36 a.m. I hadn't slept. My daughter stirred in the baby monitor, letting out a tiny gurgle yawn. My mother shifted beside her crib, humming some old lullaby I barely remembered. I stepped out of my home server room and stood in the hallway for a while, beanie still in my hand. Clarissa thought she'd breached a system, but what she did, what she failed to erase, was leave behind a signal, one that I could trace straight back to her door. The knock came just after dusk. 3 firm raps, then silence. I opened the door to Officer Cyril Thomas, federal liaison from the Office for Civil Rights. He stood on the porch wearing a Navy field jacket, badge tucked under a plastic ID lanyard, one eyebrow raised like he already knew this would be the strangest file he'd opened this quarter. "Dr. Kellum," he said. I nodded. "You're here fast." He tapped the folder in his hand. "You used a direct escalation channel. That's not common." "I didn't have time to go through HOA grievance mediation." He gave a half smile. "Neither do most people who end up right." I stepped aside, let him in, then led him past the front hall to my office. Selen's bassinet sat beside the desk, soft glows from the monitor pulsing in blue and green. My mother was in the next room, quiet, always watching now. Thomas sat across from me and opened the file. "Your report included archived digital entry logs, ID validation paths, and a matched biometric delay signature. You sure about that device ID?" "Positive. I wrote the logging protocol during the pilot phase. That delay only shows on one tablet series issued in FSIP Phase 2. And you believe the HOA president, Clarissa Morell, used that tablet to impersonate hospital personnel and access a secure neonatal wing." "I don't believe it. I traced it." He nodded. "You mentioned your hospital patched that exploit 2 years ago. Everywhere except the FSI bridge node. It was considered deprecated and excluded from regular patch cycles. No one thought to retire it manually. But she did?" "She never retired anything," I said. "She hoarded legacy infrastructure and waited for the moment it would be useful." He leaned forward. "Your child was removed from her assigned area?" "Momentarily, enough to clear 2 doors. She would have been gone if the RFID ping didn't trigger the secondary alert. I built that as a failsafe when my wife entered pre-labor. Nora wanted one last thing done right." He didn't say anything for a moment, just wrote something down in the margin of the file. Then he said, "We'll take it from here." I could breathe for the first time in days. Not relief, not victory, just breath that didn't taste like metal or acid. The next morning, a black SUV rolled into Ravenshade Glen, not unmarked, federal plates, no attempt at secrecy. The HOA board had their monthly compliance audit scheduled at the main hall. Clarissa would be there. I watched from the sidewalk, Solène in my arms, beanie snug around her head. Clarissa stepped out of the building at 8:17 a.m. She wore another crisp suit, seafoam blue today, like she was still branding her authority. When she saw the agents, she froze for half a second, just a twitch in the corner of her jaw. Then she adjusted her posture and smiled. She didn't break, not even when Thomas stepped forward and introduced himself. Not when he handed her the notice of digital misconduct investigation under federal regulation. Not even when the second officer took her tablet, Malric's tablet, and confirmed the exact firmware string that matched the entry log delay signature I'd submitted. But I wasn't watching her. I was watching Malric. He stood behind her, sweat at his collar, fingers twitching near the inside pocket of his blazer. He wasn't the one under investigation, not yet. But the lines had closed around him too. He saw me across the lawn and didn't look away this time. There was something in his face, not guilt, something more dangerous. Fear. Clarissa turned toward me once as they walked her to the SUV. She didn't scowl, she didn't snarl, she winked, like she'd planted something I hadn't found yet. But it didn't matter, because the system she trusted was no longer hers to command. The override logs had betrayed her. The same infrastructure she believed gave her divine HOA authority had handed me the map to dismantle her, and I wasn't done yet. Not until the last string of that forgotten pilot was pulled free. Not until Solene could grow up without being tagged by the ghosts of her mother's death. Malric called at 2:03 a.m. I hadn't been asleep. I was in the server room again, tracing line weights on archived access logs, triple-checking the timestamps from Clarissa's last movements. When my phone lit up, I expected another automated system flag or a failed OCR handoff. Instead, his name, Malric Venn, glowed across the screen. I let it ring once more before answering. "I didn't know she used my tablet," he said. No greeting, just those words, flat and ragged. I stayed silent. I kept it because I thought I'd need to audit something someday. The HOA buried so many old policies, I figured. Having that archive device might help me fight her if it came to that. "You gave her access." "I didn't. I swear it. I left it in the HOA records room. She must have—" He cut off, breath shallow through the phone. "They're going to trace the breach to me, aren't they?" "They already did. I cleared your name by submitting the firmware delay signature. It proves she spoofed your credentials without your direct action." Silence again, then barely a whisper. "Why didn't you let them hang it on me?" I stared at the blinking server lights. "Because you're not the one who stood outside my daughter's NICU door in scrubs." He let out a long, shaking breath. "I have something. You need to see it. It's not in the HOA's digital logs. It's a manual override binder, a record she made me keep off system. I didn't want to be involved, but I think she forged the voting tallies on the Family Support Subcommittee protocol, the clause she used to threaten custody. That made me sit up straight. You're saying that vote never happened?" "She fabricated it," Malric said. "She created a PDF mock-up of the board resolution and printed it on old HOA letterhead. I recognized the spacing. She used the old bylaws template before we digitized. Where's the binder?" "In my garage, locked cabinet. I'll bring it to you tomorrow." "No," I said, "now." He hesitated. "If you wait until morning," I said, "she'll know you're moving against her. If she has even one access point left, she'll erase every trace of your name and mine before dawn." 28 minutes later, Malric pulled up outside my house in his weathered hybrid sedan. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched like the guilt had physically worn him down. He carried a single black binder tucked beneath his coat like it was contraband. Inside, we sat in silence as he opened it on my kitchen table. The pages were yellowing. Some were printouts of email threads between Clarissa and former board members. Others were physical notes. Clarissa's handwriting, neat and looping, detailing pathway language for inserting subcommittee powers under the radar. One page stopped me cold. It was a draft of the legacy trauma enforcement policy, the one she used to block my mother from entering the community. At the bottom, scribbled in pen, "Use Ivar's loss as leverage. Frame as instability, not grief." My chest went cold. "She wanted to make you look volatile," Malric said. "She told the board you'd spiral, that Solene needed to be repatterned before she imprinted your emotional state." I stared at the page until the letters blurred. "Why now, Malric?" I asked. He rubbed his face. "Because I finally watched the NICU footage." I looked at him sharply. "She showed me the wrong clip when I asked," he continued. "It wasn't until I pulled the uncompressed timestamp logs and matched the badge movement that I saw what she really did. And I realized if she'd framed you, I'd have been complicit." I closed the binder. "Make a statement," I said. "Not just to me, to OCR, to the Cybercrimes Division. You were manipulated, but you still stood silent." He nodded slowly. "I'll testify. Whatever you need." I walked him to the door, binder clutched to my side. He paused before leaving. "She's not done," he said quietly. "Clarissa never runs unless she has something worse planned. Let her try." Because now I had the logs and the witness and the lie she built everything on, disassembled page by page. I started the counterplan at sunrise. Clarissa was still walking free, technically. The investigation had begun, yes, but no arrest, no public fallout. Ravenshade Glen was calm on the surface, but underneath, I knew she was circling her next move like a shark in glassy water. I didn't need her in custody yet. I needed the system she built to fall apart around her, while she still thought she was winning. I powered up my home server, offline, air-gapped, silent as a submarine, and opened the drive labeled Clear Trace Proof Wow 1. Everything Malric brought in that binder, scanned, indexed, and embedded with metadata. I matched it against the raw firmware logs from the FSIP access token breach. Then I overlaid those against the HOA's current subcommittee meeting archives, archived from the community portal. The pattern emerged. Clarissa hadn't just fabricated a policy. She'd ghosted entire board votes. She'd planted false attendance markers in logs. She'd cross-referenced compliance approvals from meetings that never happened, some of them scheduled while board members were provably out of state. I flagged 7 total violations of HOA charter code regarding governance integrity, all traceable, all time-stamped. But that wasn't the plan. That was just the trigger. The plan was simpler. Build a closed circuit of evidence so tight, no one inside her system could discredit it. Use Clarissa's own obsession with digital surveillance against her. Step 1. Replicate the tablet signature from the FSIP breach using an emulator. I coded myself. I didn't need to spoof it, just show the fingerprint it left. Device ID, line delay, patch level. Step 2. Reconstruct the NICU breach path as a time-stamped visual simulation. I uploaded Clarissa's exact badge movement into a 3D environment builder I'd used for hospital access audits. Now, I had a simulated walkthrough. Badge pings, door opens, hallway camera angle, all time-coded and layered. Step 3. Overlay her voice. That was the hardest part. Clarissa rarely spoke in recorded meetings, but Malric had a backup from a town hall 7 months ago. A candid moment when she'd said Solene's name during a discussion on long-term neighborhood population curves. I clipped it, matched it, synced it with a fragment of her speaking to a nurse during the NICU incident. A 4-second voice print match, spliced in cleanly. I didn't need to manipulate her words. I just needed to prove she was there. Step 4. Verify motive. I compiled every letter Clarissa had sent since Nora's death, each one more aggressive than the last. Citations, fines, veiled threats. One even referred to Solene as an emerging risk factor in communal harmony metrics. It was enough to show intent. Step 5. Wrap the package. I created a single executable evidence archive, encrypted with OCR's digital chain of custody standards. When opened, it would walk a federal reviewer through a clean sequence: policy fabrication, biometric breach, impersonation, subcommittee fraud, witness testimony, and motive. At the end, I embedded a message. She walked into a hospital dressed as someone else. She walked out thinking no one would notice. But the system she trusted to hide her was built by the father of the child she tried to take. I uploaded the archive to the OCR's confidential whistleblower intake and tagged it urgent. Then I waited. Not long. 3 hours later, I got a call from Officer Thomas. "This is surgical," he said. "Clarissa doesn't know we've reopened her digital footprint. The evidence package is being transferred to the DOJ's Cybercrime Enforcement Unit." "She's going to run," I said. "That's why we're going to let her," he replied. "Let her expose every last person who helped her." He paused. "And Dr. Kellum? There's a hearing coming. Open board. Public. You'll get your chance." I stood in my kitchen, Solene's beanie clutched in my palm again. Outside, Ravenshade Glen was quiet. Perfect hedges, gated sidewalks, the illusion of order, but the breach had already started from within. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. By morning, the HOA message board was buzzing. Not about Clarissa, yet, but about the system outage. Residents were locked out of the pool, the clubhouse, even the trash disposal gate. The board blamed it on firmware synchronization delays. But I knew better. The audit package I submitted had reached OCR's infrastructure escalation unit, and they'd already pulled administrative control away from Ravenshade's servers. The board didn't know. Clarissa didn't know. But the system she built, it was no longer under her command. Perfect. The next phase of my plan required a setting she couldn't manipulate, one that gave me access to the community and its leaders, where the architecture of her lives would be visible without needing to speak a single word. That setting was the upcoming Ravenshade Open Forum. Every quarter, residents were allowed 5 minutes of unfiltered comment during the board meeting, usually a formality, a token offering of transparency. But this time, the meeting would be held in the community pavilion, the only place in Ravenshade where the HOA's internal network was mirrored to the public kiosk. Meaning, any media I played on the main screen would route through both HOA records and resident channels. Once shown, it couldn't be buried. I prepared my footage. Simulation walkthrough. Clarissa's badge, her movement through the NICU wing, the spoofed biometric ping, matched with the internal timestamps, overlaid with her voice fragments, paired with Malric's statement, captured as a sworn video declaration. No dramatics, just facts. He confirmed the manual override binder, the forged subcommittee votes, the hoarded FSIP tablet she used. Then I added the closing note, her own violation slip, the one she hand-delivered to my door, threatening to take Solène. I encrypted the entire file with checksum validation, uploaded it to a private session file on the pavilion's media system, set to autoplay when I accessed it with a local admin code. Malric, to his credit, didn't back down. He walked into my house the night before the forum and handed me the HOA's internal committee roster, highlighted with every proxy vote Clarissa filed without board approval. It was more than fraud. It was calculated power hoarding, conducted through digital silence. "Are you ready to speak?" I asked him. He looked at the beanie on my desk, the one with Nora's initials embroidered under the hem. "She tried to frame me," he said. "That used to be enough for me to stay quiet, but not anymore." He wasn't doing it for me. He was doing it for himself. We walked together to the pavilion the next morning. Residents trickled in, most in workout clothes or weekend polos. A few with lawn chairs, because these meetings usually dragged. Clarissa arrived late, smiling, holding a pressed folder in her hand, like she always did. Calm, radiant, unshakable. She didn't know yet. The board called the meeting to order, routine policy updates, a reminder about the spring architectural review, something about new behavioral compatibility clauses for noise reduction compliance. Then came the open comment segment. I stepped forward, nodded once to Malric, and keyed in the access code at the kiosk. The lights dimmed slightly. The screen behind the board flickered to life. Clarissa's badge, the NICU hallway, the biometric ping, the visual walkthrough, her voice, the simulated movement, the binder scan, Malric's statement, her violation slip. 5 minutes, no narration, just precision. When it ended, I turned around. Silence. Clarissa didn't speak. She didn't blink. Her folder was still in her lap. A man in the third row stood. "Is this real?" he asked, directing the question to no one and everyone at once. Another resident, quiet, older, nodded slowly. "I worked NICU logistics in another state. That's real." The board chair leaned toward the microphone. "Dr. Kellum, where did you obtain these materials?" "From the systems Clarissa forgot she didn't own," I said, "and from the people she didn't think would speak." Malric stepped beside me. "I witnessed the fabrication of Policy 4.6.2. I confirmed the unauthorized use of my device. Clarissa Morell no longer holds my confidence as secretary of this board." Clarissa finally stood. She didn't protest. She walked out. Not fast, not furious, just gone. And the room didn't follow. Clarissa was still gone the next morning. No public statement, no denial. Just an empty space at the board chair's usual spot, and a vague notification posted to the HOA app. President Clarissa Morell has taken an indefinite leave of absence for personal matters. No one dared remove her name from the digital directory yet, but it was already being erased in more meaningful ways. At 10:11 a.m., the OCR investigator returned to Ravenshade Glen. Officer Thomas didn't knock this time. He buzzed the main gate, and the newly reassigned administrator, someone I didn't recognize, let him in without asking who he was here to see. He met me in my driveway. "We've completed digital forensics," he said without ceremony. Clarissa rerouted not just badge data, but family registry metadata through unauthorized access points. That's federal interference with medical and residential databases. I didn't say anything. I was waiting for the next word. He gave it to me. Arrest. Public. He nodded. Scheduled. This community deserves to see the conclusion. He handed me a second envelope. Inside was a letter stamped with federal watermarking and OCR insignia, not a warrant, a clearance. You're authorized to present at the HOA audit hearing, he said. Your logs, your findings, they're part of the federal case. But the public side of this, it needs a voice that isn't wearing a badge. I unfolded the paper. It was addressed to the interim board, and it named me, Dr. Ivar Kellum, certified presenter for digital abuse escalation testimony. I knew exactly what that meant. I wasn't just a victim. I was being handed the mic. By the time I stepped into the HOA boardroom that evening, the room was packed. The community didn't usually show up like this. Most of them avoided involvement unless it touched their lawn or mailbox. But not tonight. People had seen the footage. They'd replayed the simulation, read the timestamp breakdowns, argued about the beanie in forums I never joined. Some defended Clarissa still, calling her methods extreme but protective. Others wanted her locked up. I didn't care about either. I cared about the silence. Because for once, it belonged to me. The board allowed 10 minutes for public remarks. I didn't use visuals, no screens this time. Just me, the envelope, and my daughter's beanie, laid flat on the podium like a flag. I'm not here to ask for sympathy, I said. I'm here to explain how systems fail when power is treated like privacy. I told them what Clarissa had done, how she'd used legacy code from a discontinued federal pilot program, how she activated badge credentials linked to a decade-old contractor registry, spoofed biometric access using unpatched tablet firmware, and bypassed NICU security to physically enter a hospital wing in violation of 3 federal statutes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I explained how she used Malrich's credentials to bury blame, how she altered HOA voting records to invent subcommittees, how she falsified behavioral flags against my newborn daughter, treating grief like a disease the HOA had a duty to quarantine. And then I held up the beanie. This, I said, was the last thing my wife made, and this was the first thing Clarissa tried to erase. No one interrupted, no one shifted. Even the defenders, those who whispered about Clarissa's vision, stayed quiet. I turned toward the board. She didn't just cross lines, I said. She drew them first, then buried them in systems no one thought to check. Malrich stood from his seat and handed over his resignation letter. It had been typed, signed, notarized. I failed to speak up, he said, and I won't serve again, until I earn the right to. The board chair looked out at the audience. No one stood to defend her, not one. The motion to suspend Clarissa Morell's access, influence, and archival authority passed without dissent. Her badge was revoked, her tablet submitted for federal evidence, her digital fingerprint across Ravenshade Glen erased, and outside, the code tree glowed under dusk. It had always felt like something built for beauty. Now, it felt like something rebuilt for truth. The agents didn't use sirens. They arrived just after noon, 2 black SUVs rolling past the Ravenshade entrance like they belonged. By then, Clarissa had returned to her home under the guise of recovering from stress-related illness. No one saw her in public. No HOA statements, no digital alerts, no contrition. She had gone quiet, which meant she was recalculating. But the system had already moved without her. Officer Thomas stepped out first. The second vehicle held federal tech crime auditors. They had brought portable scanners, mobile chain of custody kits, and a warrant sealed under DOJ authority. The HOA surveillance grid, which she once weaponized, was about to document her downfall in high-definition clarity. I didn't follow the agents up to her door. I watched from across the street with Solène cradled in my arms. Her beanie rested on her forehead, soft and snug beneath the shaded brim of my jacket. The sky was heavy, low with coming rain, but everything in me felt clean. Clarissa answered the door wearing a slate gray blazer and flats. No makeup, hair tied back. A mask of control. She tried to step outside as if she were going for a walk, but Officer Thomas blocked her path with the warrant. There was no scene, no scream, no tears, no denial. She handed over her tablet first, then the badge, then the secondary device hidden in the lining of her purse. Malric's original FSE tablet, still powered on, still carrying the ghost code she'd used to walk through NICU doors like they were hers. That sealed it. They cuffed her in full view of the front lawn camera she'd once used to cite me for unsanctioned yard modifications. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A neighbor across the street came outside, then another. No shouting, just doors quietly opening, phones raised, not to interfere, but to witness. The HOA board issued a statement 2 hours later. It was short. Clarissa Morell has been removed from all board positions. Her actions violated federal privacy, impersonation, and cybercrime statutes. Her policies are nullified, her influence ended. All families affected may request redress under new community oversight. The post went viral in town groups. So did the footage of the arrest, especially the part where Clarissa looked back at her house one last time and saw no one standing with her, no allies, no flags, just a gate she no longer controlled. Later that night, Officer Thomas dropped by my house one last time, no warrant. This time, no binder. Just a flash drive and a sealed evidence envelope and a nod of respect. She never deleted her final logs, he said. We recovered them all. What happens now? She's facing charges under Title 18, multiple counts, attempted infant abduction, medical impersonation, digital fraud. They'll bury her under codes she used to twist against others. He paused. You built a stronger case than most full-time forensic teams. I built it for my daughter, I said. He looked at Solane. She's safe now? As he left, I set the flash drive on my desk, unopened. I didn't need it anymore. That night, I took Solane for a walk through the community for the first time since Nora passed. No stroller, no apps tracking her rhythm. No eyes on us except the wind and the trees. She curled against my chest and slept like she belonged here. The next morning, I dug a shallow patch beneath the code tree, just enough to plant a single sealed capsule. Inside, Nora's hospital wristband, Solene's first fingerprint sheet, and the RFID tag that once pinged a red alert when Clarissa touched her. 3 pieces of a war that didn't need to be repeated. I sealed it, covered it, and pressed my palm flat over the soil. Around me, the branches flickered in the wind, circuit board leaves whispering something I almost understood. Not peace, not closure, but something like reclamation. Something that would stay buried, but not forgotten. The clouds rolled low over Ravenshade Glen that morning, gray and heavy, but not unkind. The grass still gleamed from the night's rain, and for once, the air didn't hum with the static of surveillance. The grid was gone, the HOA's smart perimeter was offline pending redesign. Silence felt like justice. I stood beneath the code tree holding Solene in my arms. Her fingers curled around the corner of my collar, tiny nails pressing into my skin. The beanie still fit, a little looser now, frayed where the conductive thread had worn through. That green wool had seen everything: loss, theft, trial, return. And now, it was just what it had always meant to be: protection. The soil beneath my shoes was soft. I'd buried Nora's hospital wristband there a week ago, next to the RFID tag Clarissa had touched. 2 ghosts neutralized in the same ground that had once been a testing field for experimental tech. The irony would have made Nora laugh. She used to call this neighborhood the future with a mortgage. The new board had invited me to the reform meeting later that afternoon. They wanted me to advise on ethical digital compliance, to rebuild a governance system that couldn't be weaponized again. I told them I'd come, but only after this. Solene stirred against me, blinking up at the metallic branches. The morning light caught the soldered veins that ran through the sculpture, gleaming like nerves in motion. For the first time, I saw beauty in it again. Not circuitry, not control, just connection. Behind me, footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Malric approached quietly, hands in his pockets, face drawn but lighter than before. They're renaming the pavilion, he said. Board voted this morning. They're calling it the Nora Kellum Center for Family Safety. I didn't trust myself to speak. He hesitated before continuing. I also gave them my resignation. I'm not built for governance, but I'll stay on as a witness until the last hearing's done. Clarissa's trial date's been set, federal court next month. She'll appeal, I said. She can try, he replied. Her access logs can't. He smiled faintly. You turned her own system into the evidence that buried her. It's poetic. It's technical, I said. Poetry was Nora's department. Malric nodded once and walked away. His shadow stretched across the walkway, then disappeared into the glare of the morning. I knelt, setting Solange down for a moment. She reached for the grass, small fingers brushing the edge of the plaque I'd placed at the code tree's base. A simple inscription, laser-etched into brass, built to protect, reclaimed to heal. Nora's handwriting traced in the corner. I stayed there a long time, until the wind shifted and the leaves rattled like quiet applause. The sound didn't hurt anymore. It just felt alive. When I finally stood, Solange giggled at something unseen. A bird cutting through the gray sky, maybe, or her own reflection in the polished plaque. I lifted her and whispered against her ear, "We're safe now." Her beanie slipped down over her eyes, and I caught it, laughed, fixed it gently. Later, I walked toward the pavilion. The new board had gathered already, half the community seated on the open lawn, listening to the agenda that would undo everything Clarissa had ever enforced. No more legacy risk clauses. No more surveillance-based compliance. No more silent algorithms interpreting human pain as liability. When they called my name, I didn't bring a speech. I just placed Nora's framed ultrasound photo on the podium beside the beanie and said, "This is what systems should protect." The applause was soft, restrained, the kind that meant people understood without needing words. That night, back home, I sat by Solange's crib. The rhythmic blink of the baby monitor still pulsed, but it wasn't surveillance anymore, just reassurance, a signal meant for me alone. Nora's voice echoed in my memory, her laugh, the one she made when she first knitted that beanie and said, "If she wears this, she'll never be lost." She was right, because Clarissa tried to take everything, and in doing so, she returned something I'd forgotten, my own power to defend what matters. If you followed this story this far, share it, subscribe, and remember this. Justice isn't loud, it's methodical. It's proof written in the systems that tried to erase you.